Hi, everybody. Today we are going to start learning about biochemistry. So that is the chemistry that we will be talking about with biology. It's the chemistry that includes a lot of carbon, a lot of hydrogen and oxygen, and it's most of the chemical reactions that we will be talking about in this chapter. So to start us off with biochemistry, when we talk about biochemistry, we're talking about organic chemistry often. Now, the word organic does not refer to the same thing that you think of when you think of organic food. Organic means having to do with carbon. So, for example, if you look at this first bullet point, organic compounds are compounds made of hydrocarbons. And a hydrocarbon, as the name will suggest, is made of hydrogen and carbon. So when we talk about hydrocarbons, we're talking about hydrogen attached to carbon, and that makes organic compounds. And all of the chemistry in biology has to do with those two things. Now, carbon is the most important element when it comes to biology. Like we always are going to talk about carbon. So we see a picture of carbon in the upper right-hand side. There's the nucleus. There are the electrons around the outside. Carbon is the most important element for life for a reason. And that reason is the number of valence electrons. 4. You may remember from chemistry that when we draw carbon and we draw the Lewis structure for carbon, it looks like this. All right. So basically what this means is that carbon can produce 4 different bonds. Wherever there's a lone, single, unpaired electron, we can make a bond. We can make a bond right there. We can make a bond to the right. We can make a bond to the left. And we can make a bond down. That's 4 bonds. That's the maximum number of bonds that can be produced on an element. So because there's so many different bonds that can be produced, there's a lot that we can do with carbon. So let's take a moment and look at some of these things. How many bonds can these atoms make? So take a moment, based on what I just told you, come up with an answer. All right, so what we went over before is that wherever there's a single unpaired electron, we can make a bond. So for carbon, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 possible bonds. For oxygen, there's 1, 2. You cannot form a bond there or there, so oxygen has 2. Chlorine's only got 1. So carbon has a huge number of bonds that can be formed, and that means that carbon is going to be very versatile, which is going to make carbon really important to life. So here are some examples of carbon compounds, and notice that carbon always has 4 bonds coming off of it. Here is pentane. Pentane is an organic compound, and notice how many bonds are around each carbon in pentane. There's always 4. These carbon compounds can look very different. Here's benzene, and notice that each carbon, even though it looks a little different, still has 4 bonds. It's got 2, 3, 4. It's always got 4 bonds around it. There's glucose. Here's something called ATP. So carbon allows us to produce many, many, many different types of compounds that can have all sorts of different shapes and sizes. They can be long, they can be rings like benzene or glucose. They can be big, long chains like pentane or some of the other molecules. And they can be different shapes. They can be short, they can be long. So carbon allows us to do many different things. There are 4 classes of carbon compounds, and you need to know all 4 of these. There are carbohydrates, there are lipids, those are things like fats and oils. There are proteins, this is found in beans and meat and dairy products. And there are nucleic acids, like DNA and RNA. These are all of the things that make up living things. Humans, like yourself, plants, fungi, bacteria, amoebas, any single living thing is made up of these 4 carbon compounds: carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So these four different classes of compounds, basically what keeps happening to them is we break them down and we build them into new things. So think about where we get most of our material. We get it from the food we eat, right? You eat food. Well, when you digest food, that food gets broken down into smaller pieces, right? When you eat like a steak, that's from a cow. When you eat plant matter, that's from a plant. We are eating the biomolecules of those organisms and we are breaking them down into small pieces. That is called hydrolysis. That is a term you must remember for this chapter. Hydrolysis is when we take large molecules and we break them down, we rip them up into small little pieces. Like you see there, those Legos have been broken down into all of their pieces. Smaller pieces are easier to deal with sometimes, so our digestive system breaks them down. But what if we want, so let's say we eat a steak. Steak has lots of protein and fat, and let's say we want to take that protein and build more muscle with it or more enzymes with it. Well, then we have to reassemble it. Our bodies will then take what we broke down and reassemble it into larger molecules. That is called synthesis, another term that you must know. Synthesis, building something bigger from smaller pieces. Like we see here, we've taken those Legos that we broke down and we've built them into something new. Hydrolysis, breaking down, synthesis, building up. Our bodies do this all the time. We eat food, we break it down, and then we rebuild it into more of us. So what do we call these pieces? Well, some of these pieces we refer to as monomers. A monomer is a single piece or a single unit. When we build or synthesize all of these monomers into something bigger, we call that bigger structure a polymer. A polymer is several monomers connected together, or a giant chain. So you can see in the picture here that we can string monomers together to make a long polymer. Or if we're going to go off our Lego example, we can take these pieces, these monomers, and put them together to make a polymer. All right, so we've got four terms here. And we can see there that if you remember making these paper chains in elementary school, each link in the chain is a monomer. So we have all of these different monomers, and together they make up a polymer. Okay, so we have all these different terms, these four terms. You do need to know how to use them. So connect the following terms in a sentence or a few sentences, and please do so now. So as you have made your sentence, examples of sentences that would work would be, for example, hydrolysis will break polymers into monomers. Or you could say something like synthesis will build polymers from monomers. Either one of those two things would be examples of sentences that would work. Okay, so let's take a closer look into these reactions. Our synthesis reactions are called dehydration synthesis. Remember, we're building something bigger. We're building a polymer from a monomer. Now, in order for these reactions to take place, we must release H2O. So let's take a look at what that might mean. So here in this picture, we've got two monomers. The two monomers are called glucose and fructose. And I don't really care right now if you know what these look like, but this is basically one monomer, and this is another monomer. So we have two monomers. All right. Now notice that dangling off the end of each monomer is an OH. So what we can do is if our bodies want to combine these monomers into a polymer, we have to take out water. Remember, water is an H, a second H, and an O, otherwise known as H2O. So we have to get rid of two H's and an O. So if we remove this H and a second H and an O. We get rid of that. That leaves as water. We are basically left with an unfinished bond here, and then this sad little O that's all on its own on the left. These two unfinished bonds can then combine, as we see down here. You see how they combined right there? And that is a synthesis reaction. We've combined two monomers, and now we have a very short polymer. And with this, we've released water. All right. Now, the opposite of this type of reaction is a hydrolysis reaction. Remember, as we talked about before, a hydrolysis reaction will break a polymer into smaller pieces, into monomers. And instead of releasing water, this time we're going to use water. We're basically going to do the opposite that we did before. Whatever we did before, we're just going to reverse it. We're going to run it and rewind. Okay, so here we've got a short polymer. All right, now it's kind of hard to see because you don't exactly know what this is, but basically we've got a monomer here and we've got a monomer here. And what we want to do is we want to break that bond with water. So we are going to add water. And so we're going to rip apart water and we're going to add an H and an OH to one side. So you can see that there. And we're going to add in the second H to the other side. And that is going to break the bond. And now our two monomers have separated. And so we have gone from a polymer to two separate monomers. We have there, notice how that bond that was there before, it's no longer there. They've separated down there. Those two H's are not combined. So we have broken up a polymer into two monomers using water. We've basically destroyed a water to make this happen. Right? We're going to be practicing this to see what's going on, but that is where we're going to stop for today. So let me know if you have any questions.